Hello, lovely circus arts performers. My name is Loretta, and I will be your nerd for the evening. Thank you all so much for being part of this project. Lauren and I thought it might be a good idea if I did a short overview of Dante's Inferno so that you could all get a little background on the script and the source material. So here is your Dante deep cut. Incidentally, the images you're looking at are all artist renderings of hell, some based on Dante's Inferno and some are just generic hell. Plenty of nightmare fuel in there, so enjoy. Okay, so Dante's Inferno. Dante Alighieri wrote his Divine Comedy between 1308 and 1320. It's a series of 3 long narrative poems, one set in hell, that's Inferno, the next set in purgatory, Purgatorio, and the third set in heaven, Paradiso. And that right there is Dante, just in case you were wondering. 700 years after its original publication, it is still widely held to be one of the greatest works in world literature. It draws heavily from both the Christian tradition and classical mythology and philosophy. I personally believe that it is in many ways a precursor to the modern fantasy genre, and I think this largely because it just builds a really interesting and coherent universe where crazy things can happen, and probably will, and once you get a feel for the rules that govern the universe, all the craziness actually starts to make a great deal of sense. If you get a chance, please check out Overly Sarcastic's Dante's Inferno, Classic Summarized, whatever it's called. I got a couple of issues with that video. I personally don't think that Dante hated the Greek heroes. The woman who put the video together has some theory that because he was Italian, he hated the Greeks. I mean, it's possible. My feeling is that he probably was fascinated by the Greek heroes, saw them as allegories for things that human beings experience, wanted to write about them, and he put them in hell because that's where he could write about them, he felt most effectively. Cool. But that's, just my personal opinion. So here's a little, smattering of themes and rules and philosophy that I think you folks might find useful as you put together your pieces. So hell is a circular pit that burrows into the earth. And the bottom of hell is actually the center of the earth. And Dante and Virgil, his guide, climb down in a circular motion. So you can kind of think of hell as like a spiral staircase. If you're not sure, if you don't know who Virgil is, by the way, he is a poet of antiquity. He was probably the best poet of the Roman Empire, and he wrote a very famous poem called the Aeneid that is about the founding of Rome by the survivors of the Trojan War. That's the Trojan survivors. So Aeneid, poem about Aeneas, who's a Trojan. Virgil wrote it. It also includes a trip into the underworld. So I guess that's where Dante got the idea. It's a good one. Okay, so Dante and Virgil climb down into the bowels of the earth. It's called hell. They get to the bottom and then they climb out the other side. They get to the surface again and they are confronted with the mountain of purgatory, which is the next book. And at the top of purgatory is heaven. And that's the third book. And Dante goes up there and Virgil can't because reasons. Okay, so the structure of hell also kind of parallels the 7 deadly sins. If you get a chance to look them up, they are, let me see if I can do this right. Lust, gluttony, sloth, rage, greed, sloth, rage, envy, and pride. I think that's 7. Well, anyway, you get the idea. Dante kind of structures it based on those. Another way of thinking about it is he's got the sins of incontinence first. Those are the less serious sins. So the least serious sin is actually lust. And lust in his mind is basically just letting your passions override your reason and, not making good choices, essentially. So, if you like to flirt and it puts you in a compromising position and you end up being, unfaithful to your partner in some way, well, that was probably very stupid and you could have avoided it, but you didn't. It's that sort of thing. It's a lower order sin. Much more serious to Dante are the violent and those who commit frauds, those who lie. So the deeper down you go, the darker and more dangerous everybody becomes. Okay, cool. So that's very quickly the structure of hell. Another thing that I think you all will find very interesting and should probably, could possibly incorporate into your pieces is the idea that everybody in hell wants to be there. Hell is a choice. And people don't get thrown kicking and screaming there even though they're really suffering once they get there, they kind of choose it. To understand that idea, a couple of things. You have to sort of understand Dante's conception of sin. Sin's not really something we talk about much in our society, but it was very important to the medievals, so I'm going to go into it just a little bit. To understand his idea of sin, you have to understand a concept called teleology. Now, that's a very ancient concept. That dates back to the ancient Greeks. And teleology is the study of telos, which is the Greek word for end or purpose. Another way of thinking about it is the target. So everything that exists has a purpose for which it exists. The purpose or telos of a water glass is to hold water or other liquids. The purpose of a hammer is to bang in nails. That's the purpose. And even human beings have a telos or purpose. But because human beings are extremely complex and it's difficult to know, and we're also extremely diverse, my telos might be slightly different from your telos, but there probably is an overarching telos that all of us share because we're also rather similar to each other. And the Greeks came up with this sort of phrase for that thing that all human beings are geared towards and seeking and is their ultimate culmination of their existence. And that thing the Greeks called eudaimonia. Now, eudaimonia is a great word, and in Greek it means good spirit. It is usually translated into English as happiness. That's actually not a particularly great translation of the term. A better translation might be something more along the lines of meaningful life, or leading the good life, meaningful existence. Incidentally, happiness in English actually comes from a concept a little bit more akin to luck. So hap means luck. If you've ever heard of somebody being hapless, it means that they're not very fortunate. Bad things just sort of keep happening to them. And it's interesting, it's not a concept that you can really control. You can't really choose to be lucky, and we can't really choose to be happy. It just sort of happens to us. It happens. Haha, see what I did there? So it's a little different from eudaimonia, because eudaimonia in many ways is a choice. You actively seek it out. And obviously, things like good fortune and being lucky and being sort of in a high emotional state probably play into eudaimonia, but it's a bit more of a deeper, more complex understanding of being so fully human that even when things are going bad, and even when you're not lucky and you're not blessed by fortune, you're still experiencing the actualization of true human potential. I'm getting in the weeds here. I apologize. We'll bring it back. Okay, back to the text. Sorry, but that's gives you an idea of eudaimonia. So sin, therefore, in Dante's world is when people aim at something that's probably like eudaimonia, but falls short. Or they aim at eudaimonia, but they hit something else. Actually, sin comes from an ancient Greek archery term that means to miss the mark. So it's that idea. You're aiming at something and either you don't manage to do it, or you decide, well, it's kind of hard to aim at that thing, so I'm going to hit this thing instead. And the example I like to use is money. All right, so in the medieval world, there were 4 things that were sort of seen as distractions, I guess you could say. They were things that people aimed at when they should have been aiming at eudaimonia. They ended up aiming at this. And those 4 things were wealth, power, pleasure, and honor. We won't go into all of them, but using money as an example, a lot of people think that money will make them happy. And if they get money and it doesn't actually make them happy, their solution is to get more money. So it's sort of this endless cycle. And you just keep pursuing it and pursuing it and pursuing it, and you refuse to learn. Like, it doesn't matter how many times money fails to make you happy. You're just going to keep after it. And ultimately, your life's going to be kind of flat and empty. And you're not actually achieving eudaimonia, which you could if you were willing to admit that you were wrong in pursuing money in the first place. And that's one of the reasons why that's the reason why people in hell are actually kind of content to be there, and they choose to go there even though they're suffering, because they would rather suffer than admit that they're wrong, and in admitting that they're wrong, find a way to be happy. If you think about it, you know someone like this. We all know somebody. In fact, we're all like this on some level. There are times where you'd just rather be miserable than admit that you were wrong in the first place. We have all been there. God knows I have. Okay, so that's one of the ways that's why people in hell choose to be there. In fact, in the medieval period, there was actually this concept called refrigerium, which means refreshment. And it was this idea that souls in hell would be occasionally be given a chance to leave hell, be brought to the outskirts of heaven, given the opportunity to go to heaven, and they almost never would. Yeah, it's a crazy idea. They would be given the chance, and they would decide that they were better off in hell because they would rather not have to admit they were wrong and change. So if you're looking for any, attitude or posture or emotional point to work into your pieces, let me recommend Pride and Arrogance. We're doing a piece on hell. If you are proud and arrogant, you really can't go wrong. Okay, so bit of a deep cut there, but then again, that was the point. Couple of other interesting things that we should sort of expand from this is the idea of contrapasso. Contrapasso basically means that you become what you do. That's the structure of the punishments in hell. And they're not so much punishments as the natural consequence of choices you have made in your life. So if you're violent and you like the idea, or at least are accepting of the idea of spilling other people's blood and having their blood on your hands, well, then that's exactly what's going to happen to you in the underworld. So contrapasso means you become what you do, but you also, whatever you do to others ends up coming back to you. It's a little like karma. So the violent spill other people's blood, they have their blood on their hands, and in the afterlife, they are up to their eyes in boiling blood. Yep. And in a weird way, it's like, you wanted this. This is how you lived your life. This is what you wanted, and now it's yours. Are you happy now? And the funny thing is, the answer is yes. They are happy. They're satisfied with this. This is what they wanted, and this is what they got. Hell is a choice. Okay, cool. So that's something to bear in mind there. If you're wondering how that applies to your particular area of hell, I'm more than happy to go over it. It's interesting how he sort of works it in. And some of them are a little strange. Like the lustful, for example, are, they're whipping around in this wind. Well, why are they whipping around in this wind? Well, they let themselves get carried away by their passions, and now they just spend eternity being carried off by the wind, like passions. Okay. And some of them are a little more obscure, so I'm happy to go into it. Okay, last idea that I'd like to include is the concept of monsters. All right, this is a fun one that you see in a lot of different texts. Again, in fantasy texts. You know where you see this idea? You see this idea in The Lord of the Rings, if you're familiar at all with those movies or those books. And it's the idea that you lose yourself and become a monster by committing sins. So if contrapasso is the process by which your sin kind of comes back on you, being a monster is sort of the end result. And the idea is, if you're so involved with the sin, eventually you're defined by it, so that you don't really have an identity or personality outside of it. And you start to lose that which makes you human, and you start to lose that which makes you you. So the greedy, the avaricious in hell, they're all so dimmed by their pursuit of money that you can't really tell one from another. And Dante is informed by Virgil, if you're thinking of finding anyone you know here, don't bother, you're not going to be able to recognize them. Another way that this is sort of played into is, for example, the monsters themselves, the sort of mythological monsters, like the centaurs, for example, or the minotaur. Anytime you see something that's like a combination of human and a beast or an animal, that's a representation of human beings who have let their sort of worser nature, their instincts, their proclivity for violence, sort of overpower things like their reason, their sense of compassion, their sense of justice. All that has been kicked out, and you end up with this semi-human thing that's probably more a beast than anything else, and that's a monster. Just working it back to like the Lord of the Rings thing, like the idea is, like the ring wraiths, for example, they used to be people, but now they're essentially just shadows. They don't really have wills of their own. They're controlled by the will of another being, Sauron in their case. And that's sort of the relationship that the souls in hell have to their sin. They're not really who they are anymore. They're controlled largely by the sin itself. Okay, just to wrap up real quick then, I would recommend that everyone think about pride and arrogance while they're creating their pieces. I would definitely recommend exploring a sense of bestiality, corruptedness, irrationality with these pieces as well. And it's probably worth stating a sense of genuine suffering. Like, it's not fun to be here. It's not fun to be in hell, and yet people remain. So, those are 3 things that I would definitely recommend everyone explore, and of course, I'm happy to discuss them more if you feel you need to. Or even if you just would like to, because as you probably have noticed, I love talking about this stuff. All right, thanks so much, everyone, and I look forward to meeting everybody and seeing your pieces. Okay, I'm out.